All right. Here is a map I've made of the wetlands of the South Nation River watershed. In blue would be the wetlands. You can see the elevation of pretty much every wetland complex. I've marked beside it. To the right, I've marked the north to south uh, span of the South Nation watershed, so about 90 kilometers. Of course, north to south because it flows more northeast to no southwest to northeast. Of course, the actual length of the river is longer, but just to give you an idea of the size we're dealing with, and this is about 4,000 square kilometers of land area. So you can see there's not that much of a drop in elevation from the highlands, so 190 meters, the highest points, 86 close to the Ottawa airport for the wetlands, but yeah, it does get to 100 meters close to the Ottawa airport, south of Ottawa. Um, very low elevation. So we are in the St. Lawrence lowlands. We are in the Ottawa Embayment. So of course you'd see a lot of flatland and a lot of wetland complexes. That was before colonization. Because nowadays most of the areas that are in blue are areas where there would have been clay and a lot of organic matter deposited at the bottom of the wetlands. So these areas were ideal for farming when we drained the wetlands. Well, first we cut the forest, and that made it easier to drain the wetlands to farm. So all the areas in blue are the areas that are mostly cultivated because I'm going to tell you what the line means. So the red lines mean where rainwater comes into contact with the bedrock. So you do have some seepage straight into the bedrock. So and creating also an impoundment for water in the highlands. So you do have a few wetland complexes in the highlands, um, close to Maxville, where it's 90 meters, in the center of the map. At the bottom left, 100 meters close to Roebuck. Um, and then, of course, 86, 82 meters south of Ottawa and just east of Russell, west of Russell. Um, so you would have more or less three types of wetland complexes. So you have those highlands that I've talked about, and those highlands would have been close, near, on top of the close or near, yeah, to the sandy beaches of the Champlain Sea. So fine sand, which is easily eroded, um, which can make its way into the water and deposited either further down river of the South Nation or into the Ottawa River in the St. Lawrence. So downriver from these, you have the North Gower drumlin plains. So you have exposed bedrock in the middle right there where you have the green lines all facing the same direction. That's the direction that the ice would have gone south at the beginning of the ice age and then retreated to gone north in a more northerly direction. But yeah, those lines more or less were gouged by the green lines were gouged by the in the bedrock, and also that's where the till accumulated because that's where the bedrock is more exposed. It comes out, and it catches the boulders being carried by the glaciers, underneath the glaciers, because of the pressure. So these wetland complexes are smaller in nature because you have a lot of drumlins, you have a lot of till and exposed bedrock. So again, you have seepage into the bedrock. And also, you have smaller and more complex wetlands that are ideal for beavers. And that's exactly why the river in that region is named the Castal River, so the Beaver River. So yeah, you would have smaller but more numerous wetland complexes in the Castal River region, with the exception of the vast wetland complex that would have been at 72 meters on the South Nation River, passing south of the Castal River. So these don't have a lot of drift cover. By drift cover, I mean clay, sand, till covering the bedrock. So these would have been close to the bedrock. And once the organic matter is gone, you don't have a lot of clay left to cultivate. So you do have a lot of rocky crags and a lot of boulders strewn about, which is not really ideal for cultivation, but it is ideal for beavers, like I said, and wetlands and fish nurseries and everything that comes with it: cranberries, blueberries, bogs, swamps, fens, birds, the bees, and the wildlife, and the tourism, ecotourism, agrotourism, and all that stuff that would be ideal in the region because of the amount of water that would have been on the surface. So moving on downriver from these till plains, these drumlin plains, that's where it started getting pretty complex, because now you start deviating from the bedrock. So this is where you get at the bedrock valley, the deepest point of the Ottawa Embayment, and it shows in the surface topography right here, in the sheer size of the wetlands. So starting from Russell all the way to Vankleigh Hill, you have a wetland complex on top of 20, 30, up to 80 meters in the Limoges area of clay, lead clay deposited by the Champlain Sea. So these dozens of meters of clay act as an aquitard, so it retains water on the surface for longer before it can drain through and go to the bedrock. So these, of course, create, just like you would put a plastic bag in a depression, or just like you would pour water into your cup, a bowl, it retains water. So a lot of open wetlands in this region, and not a lot of areas where forest would have been able to grow, or at least trees that can resist waterlogging would have been able to grow, but everything else is a no-no. Whereas in the sandy reaches and in the till plains, there's a lot of wetlands, but it would have been a lot of exposed bedrock and a lot of exposed sand ridges that would have been ideal for forests. So it would have been a more diverse environment in that sense, terrestrial and aquatic, semi-aquatic, which would have enabled predator species like the bear and more terrestrial species to go and find prey, which would have given the Bear Brook its name because of the amount of bear that would have been seen. Yeah, just an example. So Castal River and Bear Brook, there's a reason why they have their name. And then, yeah, getting south of that big sandy ridge, the Prescott-Russell sandplain that was created by the Ottawa River Delta 8,000 to 4,000 years ago. Oh, longer than that, I think. Yeah, 9,000 to 4,000 years ago. Dug into the sand, dug into the clay, deposit a big sandy ridge of more coarse grained sand. Because of the flow of the water, would have been able to move larger particles, whereas the sand that I've talked about before would have been finer grained because of the wind and wave action causes a finer grained sand. And this isn't erosion, it's more like transportation of sediments and then sedimentation. So creating this big sandy ridge in itself would have had a lot of wetlands. So if you've been to Fer-à-la-Rose, you know that there's a lot of beavers, a lot of wetlands, ideal because of the dozens of meters of sand that does let water through, but the clay underneath retains the water, so the sand act more or less as a shield through which the water has to flow. So a lot of wetland complexes in there, and a lot of distributaries. So tributary is one branch, one part of a watershed. So the South Nation is a tributary of the Ottawa River, but distributaries are part of a watershed that leave a main branch and then come back to rejoin the main branch later on, so a delta. So the South Nation is a delta, so this would have been the case for this sandy ridge, the Prescott-Russell sand plain. And the reason why it's called a plain is mostly because it's flat along its entire length, but it is a ridge. So you have the Bear Brook close to Ottawa, then you have South Indian Creek in the middle, and the La Rose Forest. Then you have the South Nation meeting where it meets to Moose Creek. And then you have Scotch River. And then you have a few small creek emptying into the Alfred Bog, which would have emptied into the Alfred Bog, which no longer empty into the bog. But these would have been distributaries. So when there's high amounts of rainwater, when there's meltwater coming through, the distributary take the excess amount of water and distribute it to the wetlands, to the Mer Bleu Bog, to the Bear Brook, and the Hammond area, wetlands over there. Then you have the Cobbs Lake area, and of course the Alfred Bog and the Atoka Creek region. So sharing the load of water into different wetlands would have eased the load on the main channel, which is no longer the case. So you see a lot of landslide from Castleman to Eddyville. And you see a lot of erosion on these channels still, and a lot of smaller landslide that are not as sensational, but are still as detrimental to the environment and detrimental to agriculture downriver in the Cobbs Lake region and Alfred region, and detrimental, of course, to the sedimentation of the Carillon Dam on the Ottawa River. So making the reservoir and the power generation less effective. And of course, sedimentation happens on the riverbed of the South Nation River, raising the riverbed and ultimately creating more and more flooding as the years go by. So this is more or less before colonization what the South Nation would have looked like on the water table, with a bit of physiographic elements. Which is, of course, no longer the case. Instead, you have narrow channels, and you no longer have distributaries. Instead, all the water flow during the spring thaw and during hot periods of heavy rain, all empty into Cobbs Lake, the floodplains there, and of course make their way to the Ottawa River in a span of a few hours from the headlands to the Ottawa River. That's bad. It's very bad for a lot of ecological reasons, and I think I'm going to explore in a different video all the reasons why this deteriorates not only the environment but the quality of life and the economy of Eastern Ontario. I think that's it for now. Have a nice day and have a nice New Year's.